welcome to the next edition of Atomic Ergo. I'm your host, Earl Ray Neal, and we are exceptionally happy today to have our CEO with us, Nicole Case. I am very excited to spend some time with you on the podcast. Know you personally, was absolutely blown away by your magnetism and your personality and your and just the Nicole, so to speak, the Nicole factor, so to speak. Nicole, if you spend any time with her, she's the kind of person that just kind of takes over a room really when she walks in, and we're just so fortunate to have her leading Ergonauts as our CEO. She has a BA in political science, which is something that we actually share in common, from the University of Nebraska. She has an MBA. She was the membership chair of HIMSS in the past, I think from the San Antonio chapter. You've been really active in the Humane Society and Canines for Warriors.com. That is obviously something very close to my heart. I love animals very, very, very much. So if you don't mind, just before we get started, talk just quickly about our reverse sponsor, if you would, today, Canines for Warriors.com, Nicole.
Sure. So the Canines for Warriors group, there's a number of groups out there who train service animals for veterans or for folks with disabilities or who are in need of service dogs. And Canines for Warriors is one that I got involved with in my last corporate job. So I had a charitable budget that was sort of discretionary, and we sponsored a dog through training. And at the end of it, we got this book with the pictures of the dog when they got paired with their veteran. And what I really love about this organization is, a couple of things. One is that they use dogs that come from shelters. So they call the shelters for larger dogs, which are harder to adopt anyway. And a service dog for their purposes needs to be at least 45 pounds. So at the time when I started working with them, they were actually flying dogs from Texas to Florida because they were using up their local supply. They've since leased land from the San Antonio Humane Society and not the Humane Society, the San Antonio Animal Services, and they have built a training facility here as well. So they've doubled the impact there. But every dog that they save also saves a veteran, right? And they have fantastic statistics and scientific studies they've done that show, reduction in substance abuse, increase in work, increase in social activities, and just real life-saving activities that come out of these service animals. So support any organization that does service dog training. Canines for Warriors is a fantastic one to get behind.
The website's www.caninesforwarriors.com. Certainly your career history is impressive. As I said, currently you're the CEO for Ergonauts Performance Technologies. You were also the CEO for Federal Consulting Insight Advisors. You have had experience in military, NGOs, those types of things. So you bring just a vast swath of knowledge to the job as CEO for Ergonauts. So how did you get here? Tell us a little bit about your background and sort of how you what's your story, I guess.
Yeah, my story is it's not one of planning, and it's not one of prediction. It's more along the lines of new opportunities come along and I'm willing to take the leap. So I started out as an Air Force brat. I've been a military kid my whole life. And I had kind of an atypical brat experience in that we didn't move around from the time I was in kindergarten through retirement for my dad, which was 7th grade for me. So he went remote for a few years, but we were able to stay in one place. Now, my whole friend group moved. My whole friend group turned over every 2 years. And that was a fantastic experience. And it was a fantastic experience to grow up in such a diverse community. People probably don't think it's going to be a diverse community because it's in Nebraska, but surrounding a military base, we had just tons of diversity and great experience there. And then I stayed on in Nebraska when it was time to go to college. And I ended up at University of Nebraska of Omaha in part because they gave me a full ride scholarship, and that seemed like a pretty good deal to me. And I started out there as an education major, and then had a full-on life crisis at 18 in my first week of college, because I discovered I didn't like anything about the curriculum at all. So you went through drop and add and ended up in a sophomore level international relations class, which I absolutely adored. And I love the professor. Dr. Bacon will always be somebody who was very impactful to me. And that just became my goal at that point, was to finish out as a political science major, because I knew, essentially I needed just to get a degree. And I worked full time in tech while I was in college. I've worked full time since I was 16 years old. And the tech aspect and the career aspect that evolved out of that was, again, a series of sort of serendipitous events that got me into technology and kept me there. My first technical job, my first actual full-time job, I worked at a company that made products for Unix workstation. So I had a Unix workstation on my desk as my desktop as my first work experience. And I didn't know the difference one to the other. I didn't grow up, programming computers like kids do now. So it was a fantastic opportunity for me. And then about halfway through my career, I worked the first half of my career in technology, doing software development projects and business systems analysis and testing and that sort of thing. And I got to the point where they were going to give me a second pager. So if you remember 1999, what that world looked like, and I was like, I don't think I need a second pager. So I did a little bit of a pivot, went into technical sales at that point. And at the time, I said to the company I was working with, like, okay, I'm not sure I'm ready to let go of the hands-on technology. So I'll do this sales thing. But if I sell something I think is really cool, I want to be able to work on it too. Well, I never went back and worked another operational project after that. I just went deep into sales and evolved from there. And again, sort of accidentally fell into government systems integration, and spent the last 20 years in government systems integration, where my clients were primarily federal health entities, primarily military health and VA, as you mentioned, also the whole span of NIH and HHS entities and CMS. One of my favorite topics, honestly, is Medicare fraud. I could do a whole hour on Medicare fraud and not even take a breath, probably, because I don't think I took a breath this whole paragraph. So I'll pause for a second.
Well, so let's skip to 2021. We're a year into the pandemic. You're, as you said, in one of the most sought after positions in government integration business. You had a clear path, up the corporate ladder, but you make a decision that you want to help small businesses. So, talk to us about that and sort of what got you interested in Ergonauts, for example.
Yeah, across the span of my career, I've worked in very large companies, $13 billion company. I've worked in small startups as well. Matter of fact, in the 90s, I had 11 different employers in the span of 10 years. And more than half of those went out of business in that span of 10 years, which was, there's a lot of learning experiences there when you have to have the discussion with your employer that, if you don't make payroll, I won't work. Like, this is a fundamental consideration that we should have here. So
I have bills.
yeah, exactly. I have bills. So if you want me to continue to work, you have to pay me. And I worked for employers that were making decisions like that who was going to get paid this week. And, those experiences are very, obviously they happen at a very formative time, but I've always loved entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur. I even had a company that I started when I was 19 and in college, and we had 4 other college people or college age people who are our partners, and we launched a Christmas business, and we did over $100,000 in our final year, and that was between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we were standing out in the cold, in a parking lot like gypsies selling Christmas decorations. So it takes a lot of work to get to that number, to get to $100,000 in that final year, and even in that experience, like so many so many things in life. Like you learn from good experiences, but you really, really learn from bad experiences, right? So you can look at the good bosses you've had and say, well, that boss, he was a really good boss. But you can look at bad bosses that you've had and you'll be like, I am never going to do the following 5 things to my employees that this guy did to me, right? And so those bad experiences early in your career, and that first business that I started back then, it closed on a bad experience, and I've never taken away from that anything other than the learning to say, okay, how do you manage a relationship to avoid that? But, I love an underdog story. As a Midwesterner, we want to see everybody win. We want to see everybody happy. And I love helping companies reach their potential. And at this point in my life, and at the point in 2021 when I walked away from my corporate job, and I'm not gonna lie, there's a COVID element to walking away from that job as well. That I'd worked remote for over 20 years. And so it's kind of funny to me. Everybody else was just sort of catching up to my way of life, and learning how to work remote. And that was fantastic. That eased so much. And I think there's so much value to that. But I looked at where I was from a experience in what I can give back into the community. And, even though my corporate job, I always felt like what I was doing was creating jobs. Like I always think of sales as creating jobs, especially when you're working in a contracting environment, or it's helping somebody keep a job. Like if it's a contract that's being recompeted, it's already your contract. People don't want to move jobs. They don't want to have to change. So I always viewed my job not so much in terms of the bottom line that it would add to a $13 billion corporation, but more along the lines of, well, I know that Fred and Sarah would like to keep their jobs and I would like to help them keep their jobs. But when I started looking at sort of the level of contribution and what was meaningful to me, I loved my team in my last role. I loved what we were doing in terms of developing that team and bring some people forward career wise. But the work itself wasn't bringing me the level of fulfillment that I get now working with startups and really being able to share this really broad experience that I have. And I was just talking to somebody yesterday who may sign up with my consulting company, and what I offer them is like a crash course accelerated experience to get them on a engagement strategy with federal agencies that they can do that I can do that for them in the span of 2 to 3 months. That would take them on their own probably 2 to 3 years.
And that's where
Right.
you spent most of your career serving in those positions with those small businesses. It's been primarily DoD related. It looks like veterans. It's obviously a passion of yours. So you had a conversation or had conversations with Ergonauts, and much like what you're talking about now, you agreed to help with business development, and then sort of everybody just saw what a star you were, and they said, kind of come on board and be a part of the team. So this is Ergonauts is a completely different industry for you. I think you would agree with that. A lot of we live in a country where a lot of people can't say ergonomics, let alone define it or even run a company that focuses on it. So how's it going? How do you like it? How do you find it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting, and I've really enjoyed sort of this stretch, and in some ways it's less of a stretch than it might look like, because fundamentally working in federal health, we are working on programs that are designed to make people's lives better. Now, whether or not the federal programs achieve those goals, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that was what we were always supporting. I never worked in a federal environment where I was designing a better gun or bomb or something like that. I was always working on projects and programs that were meaningful to me, and that remains one of my guiding principles. Is I really only work on things that are meaningful to me. If you look on my website for my consulting company, you'll also see that I also have a guiding principle that I don't work with assholes, and that's a super important principle now too. So we keep those two things going on Ergonauts
Well,
very
you
easily.
realize there's going to be some people watching this going, "Why is she talking to Earl Ray Neal?"
Earl Ray.
I just want you to know that.
Yeah, so you definitely don't fall into that category,
Okay.
but it is kind of funny when I say that to people, because I lay that out early on in a conversation with somebody who's approached me to do business, because it's like, let's be clear about this. Like, if you can't be honest and upright and friendly and fun, like, don't bother, because we don't got time for that. No, ain't nobody got time for that anymore, right?
Right.
But with Ergonauts, and what really is inspiring about Ergonauts is not just the dedication that Steve had to keep the company moving forward for as long as he did, in the ways that he did, but also that, fundamentally we can improve people's lives and prevent injury and do business better. Like all those things actually come together. And I have a hard time coming up with anything else in business that you can do that actually both helps the bottom line and helps the humans that work for you with every dollar that you spend, right? Most of the time it's a very uneven kind of situation where you're helping the company, but you're screwing the employees, or you're trying to help the employees, but there's no clear benefit to the company, right? And if you take the view of enterprise ergonomics, you actually do both. And it's a fantastic message and it's a fantastic mission to take on. And the work that we do and the things that we engage ourselves in has to be about more than money. So, one of the things I always ask people when I'm interviewing them for a new job is I would say, well, where are you going to find joy in this role? Like people would sit down for an interview for a sales role and they're going to tell me about the gobzillions of dollars that they made and the Rolodex of people, important people that they know. And that's good. Those are, basic skills and qualifications. But if you can't tell me what you love about doing this particular job and you're just here for the money, that's a short-term relationship, because especially in sales, the money fluctuates quite a bit. So, and you get a lot of rejection. So if you don't know why you're doing the thing you're doing and what brings you joy in that, it's not going to last. And those things come together really obviously for me with Ergonauts as well.
So Ergonauts launched their technology platform. It's called obviously Algo Office, September the 29th of last year, under your leadership. Since that time, what have you learned about the market since our launch that you didn't expect to learn? And where do you see this going, Nicole?
It's been a really interesting launch. We underwent a massive redo on the programming and the platform itself prior to launch. So, coming into it, we felt really strongly that our tools were, ready. They're addressing the right market segment. We're doing the right things with them. There's always a balance between the number of features and the capabilities versus let's get something out and get started with it. So we felt like we picked very much the right path. In focusing in on the office ergonomics assessment, as well as the generating, the automated reports and the content of that report that brings the greatest value. But, so everybody we launch and we've got this great idea that we know what we're doing. And of course, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So as soon as we launch, we start having conversations, we get great feedback, and we start to discover that, actually, everybody who sees our tool loves our tool. And it doesn't matter if they're, a 15-year experienced ergonomist or if they're, just getting started in health and safety and they have an idea what they do. Across the spectrum, they love the tool. There's something within it that will make everybody's job better, no doubt. And what we thought we were going to run into is, great, I have a team of safety people at this corporation. Let's train them. Let's get them started and let's start, endeavoring to actually achieve an enterprise ergonomics program that to date hasn't been achievable because you could never get the quantity and quality of office ergonomic assessments needed to establish a baseline. But that's not what they said. Instead, they said, yeah, this is great. We really want to do it. All of our ergonomists or all of our safety people are already so tied up in our workers' comp claims and in our exceptional cases. We cannot get to a baseline evaluation. We can't even imagine it. However, could you do it for us? Could you take on the enterprise ergonomics for us? Could you do a baseline assessment for all 20,000 of our employees across the globe? And it's like, well, the answer is always yes. So I'm going to say yes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to figure out how to do it.
It's like they can't swim because learn to swim because they're in a flood.
Because they're already in a flood. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, what has happened is, we continue to move forward as planned. We're expanding as planned. We've got ongoing investments in additional components of the platform. We have had some really great feedback about enhancements we can do to the initial office ergonomics. So we're continuing to invest and enhance the product itself. And because of the feedback that we got from industry, we have pivoted just a little bit to start working through partnership programs that will allow us to bring large scale assessment to the table as an option, right? And obviously Ergonauts is not hiring 10,000 people, tomorrow to do that, but we do that through partnership with clinics or occupational therapists or other entities that already have a nice footprint in the geographies that we're looking at, and they use our tools to be able to perform assessments. We run the enterprise ergonomic program for them. So it's, one of the things that has always been true for me is, like, if you're not able to fail fast, then you should just get out of the way, right? So, and we didn't fail so much as we discovered 12 new things we hadn't imagined, right? And that's always going to be true anytime you do something.
And you discovered that by listening to your customers, obviously.
Right.
So what are the customers telling you about Ergo's lean design?
So it's interesting because, again, that's one of those things that if you know what lean means, and all the different words, et cetera, then that becomes a whole different conversation. And the lean nerds like to geek out with each other and talk about how the principles of lean have come together to create these great tools. So, for those people, they want to hear all about the 83 process, et cetera. But, for other people that aren't as familiar with lean, they get excited about when we translate for them that, well, we used the lean principles to create a set of tools that prevents error, right? And keeps you focused on the work stream, gets rid of waste within the work stream. Like, those are all words that everybody understands as well. You don't necessarily have to tell somebody that's a lean principle, because they may or may not understand what that means, but they absolutely know what it means when you say, every one of your evaluations will be done in exactly the same manner, with the same consistency and the same quality. And that's something that hasn't been achievable previously. And the underlying lean factors are what makes that possible within the tool set.
So the magnitude of the problems that are associated with poor ergonomics, it's huge. It's costly to employers. You frequently talk about the millions of boomers that are reaching retirement age. I think I've heard you say it's one every 8 seconds, or close to 11,000 a day. So with that in mind, what advice would you give to other CEOs that are either experiencing labor shortages or about to experience the inevitable labor shortage?
It's such an interesting time to be a leader right now when you talk about staffing and retention. And there's a Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. And I feel like a little bit of our times right now is kind of Chinese curse interesting. But I want to believe, and my optimistic side believes, that leadership has always actually cared about the humans that produce goods and services for them. But my pessimistic side, there's plenty of examples, and I certainly have the experience of having felt like I was just one more cog in the machine, one more line on a spreadsheet, right? And that's not a great feeling to have. But from my viewpoint, the companies who are going to survive and ultimately win have to move past this sort of cog in the machine, line on a spreadsheet mentality when it comes to their talent. And they also need to recognize that as this talent pool continues to age, we will need to accommodate them before injury is created as well. And so it's not just in reaction to a workers' comp issue, but ultimately, as I age and my flexibility is reduced, or I've developed arthritis in certain joints, then giving me some accommodations so that I have maybe a desk that goes up and down and allows me to stand up and take a break from sitting, or sit down, take a break from standing. Those kinds of things will go a really long way in improving not just my productivity and my ability to stay employed with you, but there's this period, we measure the impact of ergonomic injury based off of things like workers' comp claims, right? And that is the cost of the claim plus the cost of fixing the human. We don't measure, and I don't know that there's a way to do it, but we don't measure, the months or weeks before that injury occurs, when Jane was sitting at her desk complaining that her back hurt and then impacting the productivity about everybody else around her. So there's this period of declining productivity, not just for her, but for everybody who has to listen to her complain, right? That if you, again, proactively went in and said, Jane, how can we make your desk more comfortable? How can we help prevent injury? Not only can you prevent the costly claim, but you just prevented that period of downcline. And everybody around her will see that you treated her in a humane and caring fashion, and that's going to lift productivity everywhere. And long term, employers, I mean, everybody knows it costs 3 times more to get a new employee than it does to retain the one you've got, right? And as long as we keep that in mind, retention has to move higher and higher. And those, buying somebody a good chair is nowhere near the cost of having a pizza party every Friday, and probably creates a whole lot more goodwill than that stupid pizza party every Friday ever could. So it's a good investment across the board.
So for months, we've got time for maybe a couple more questions. I'm trying to hit a few highlights with you, but for months, I've heard you use this term, democratizing ergonomics. Obviously, with my political science background, that gets my ears perked, my antenna goes up. So talk about that a little bit. Then we're going to move into this is the first in our series in the podcast we're going to focus on women in leadership. So I'd like to hear about your democratizing ergonomics idea. And then I've got a question about, sort of where you see yourself as a female in a leadership role, and ask you about some advice that you may have for other female CEOs. So tell us about this. It's a great book title, just so you know, democratizing ergonomics. So let's hear it.
Well, it's funny because I don't even know that I intended to use that word when I did. So, if you tend to be sort of a glib person and try to use stories to evoke understanding when you're talking to somebody, I think the term just slipped out of the deep recesses of my mind somewhere from my 35 years ago getting a political science degree. But there are a couple aspects of the phrase that really do resonate with people, and I think it's really important. One is that the services that are needed to support better ergonomics, enterprise ergonomics within a corporation have to this point been sort of elitified, right? Only the people that are in the greatest amount of need get those services. But if we democratize that and we apply and spread evenly across the corporation ergonomic assessment and better office ergonomics, then that's going to have an immediate impact on the quality of life within a company. So that's one aspect of the democratization. I've also found myself using it when we talk about creating a new army of evaluators, right? Because ergonomic evaluation, again, has been pushed up into this elite profile of people who've been in ergonomics for years and years and years. And our premise is that if you take somebody who is a reasonably smart person, a reasonably good communicator, just your average worker, to be honest, right? No, not anything special necessarily, but you can train them and give them a set of tools and tell them what to do. And anybody can be an ergonomic evaluator at that point, because the tools do the hard thinking. And then it's just up to the person to be able to follow the process and interact with the person being evaluated. So we can democratize not only the delivery of the services to the people that, across the board who need them, but also democratize the training and the availability and the education to be an evaluator. So I think those two aspects come together on that word, and it's whether or not it becomes a tagline or a book title. Yeah, I guess we'll see in the future.
Obviously, you're a strong advocate for women in leadership, and you show that by the example that you set. Again, you're the first in our Women in Leadership series of the podcast. We're going to do a few of those. So what career or life advice would you give to women who are starting their careers and who share your vision for change? Because if you've been paying attention, folks, this is a person who has a vision for change. And the ability to guide people and lead people to that change. So what advice do you have?
It's really hard to go sort of broad brush and give advice to all women at once, but I am super excited, and I am re-energized on a daily basis by the people that I see who are coming in the generations behind us. That I graduated from high school in the 80s and I've cut my professional teeth still in the early 90s, and I think that there's a lot of people who would be stopped in their tracks with some of the stories I could tell them about the kinds of harassment and discrimination that I ran into. And part of my process for dealing with that at the time was just like, I'm just not going to stop. So I put my head down, put my horns out, and I keep running through. And that's not always fun, or certainly not painless. But there comes a point when you can get caught up in what the problem is, or you can just keep going and just don't stop and don't stop fighting. And I think that that is, some of the things that have happened in the last few years, where we see rollbacks of women's rights and things like that, that are just incomprehensible. You never would have imagined 10 years ago that some of the things that are happening today in terms of attacks upon human rights and women's rights are occurring. And it's really, really depressing. And we can't stop fighting. And you have to keep going and keep believing that the fight that you're fighting is the right fight. And, there have been a bunch of fights that I fought that I didn't win out at the level I wanted to, but I know the next person come along behind me is going to benefit from the fact that I fought that fight. And they might have to fight still too. And we might be fighting for 3, 4, 5 more generations, but we're not going to stop. And you can't. And the other piece about it too is that in having that fight and continuing to push forward for pay equality, which, pay equality has been stagnant for 20 years. Women are still sitting at about 80% of pay compared to men, stagnant for 20 years, right? There's a part of that is incumbent upon us to know our value and demand our value as we go into these situations. And that can be super uncomfortable to do. And I've talked to plenty of men who are uncomfortable trying to negotiate for positions as well. But it comes down to education. It comes down to having the right language in your pocket, and then knowing that you are worth it. And as we move into the changes that are going to happen in this job market, women and anybody who's able to come in to do a job are going to be in higher demand. So fewer workers, more jobs. Now is the time to fight forward and demand equal pay. And whatever it is you think you should get paid, you probably should ask for 20% more, because you're probably undervaluing yourself along the way. So, I do a lot of work with, on the side, I help people with, resumes as they're transitioning, especially out of the military, because I know so many people who are active duty. And, that is a conversation that I have all of the time about how do you go into a job situation and make sure you get what you're worth, and make sure that you establish what it is you're there to do. And that's incumbent upon you as you go in. So just demand more and help out other people along the way. And that's how we're going to get there.
What do you, Nicole, what do you want your legacy to be in Ergo life? What do you want it to be?
I hope I have a few more years before I have a legacy. I hope that I'm not, tomorrow is not my legacy time, but if I died today, I know that part of my legacy, and probably the part that I'm most proud of, are the people that I've helped along the way, and help them personally, help them professionally, to change their careers and change their lives along the way. And I'm grateful I have the gift of time that I can see that now, that I've made that impact on somebody over time. And my son just graduated from college with a degree in computer science, and my other child just finished her first year in college. So, I see my legacy in creating a couple of human beings who are strong and capable and independent, and have been since about the age of 10. And I'm really, really excited to see what kind of productive humans they become in the world that we have today. And, I think from an ergonomics perspective, I think we're going to redefine what people and what the world thinks of when they think of ergonomics, in the next few years. And we're applying it in ways that nobody's expecting it right now. And some of the products that we're developing and some of the platform additions that we're doing right now, ergonomics is really about improving how a person interacts with their environment, and applying that across that broader spectrum is super exciting. And I hope in 5 years we have statistics that show that we really improve the world and we really improve people's lives. And I think we will, because we're working with a client set who wants to see that as well. Excuse me. So I'm really excited about that.
See that, folks? I told you, she's amazing. I'm telling you. You probably see why I'm a Nicole fan. So thank you so much for your time today. The time's actually gone by way too fast. We covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate your preparation for this. I appreciate your leadership and your willingness to get out and to talk about what ergonomics can do for employers, what it can do for employees, and then how Ergonauts is leading that charge. So thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Earl Ray. You're a lovely host. So I appreciate
Thank
that.
you. Hey, folks, go to www.k9forwarriors.com. In the notes, tell them Nicole Case sent you.
Make a donation, you'll change somebody's life.
So we appreciate your time. And until next time, everybody, be good to each other.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.